Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, June 4th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
So much to talk about today. Elon Musk coming out against the big, beautiful bill, calling it an atrocity or a monstrosity or something or else-ocity. And basically going directly to war with Trump, literally, 5 minutes after, leaving his semi-employ. One thing, continuing issues involving the distribution of food aid in Gaza, as this operation has proved staggeringly successful, the effort to delegitimize it and to make it appear as though the act of distributing 1 million meals a day is a war crime continues apace, with Western useful idiots, propagandists, and just generally in bad faith actors contributing to this atmosphere. We have one quick detail from the New York Times, an op-ed, a quite startling op-ed from a very liberal, the head of a very liberal organization, which presents itself as a Jewish organization, but is actually simply a sort of Democratic Party subgroup called the National Council of Jewish Women. Sheila Katz published an op-ed in the New York Times about how all Jews now feel threatened. Jews have felt threatened since October 7th. It is snowballing, and that for people on the left, the experience of having their allies and colleagues say nothing to them and say nothing about the threat to Jews and all of that is something that is extremely distressing to her. And the New York Times, or the copy desk, or the virtual online copy desk of the New York Times, when it released this piece yesterday morning, put the headline on it: American Jews are paying for the war in Gaza.
I didn't see that.
And then about an hour later, they changed it to Jews are afraid right now. Somebody said, what?
Yeah.
But
was it a member of the Suleiman family who was running the copy desk when they published
no,
that
because
piece?
the Suleiman family, they only want to be doctors, Matt.
They're not going into
five
journalism.
children, the 5 children of the guy who overstayed his tourist visa so that he could be here to throw firebombs at Jews, also managed to bring over his wife and 5 children who have remained in the United States. And one of them, his daughter, is very sad because, it's her dream to be a doctor. So let her go be a doctor in Egypt. They have medical schools in Egypt. Let those people get out of this country in which they were illegally, in which their father set 4 Jews on fire, 8 people on fire. Get out of here. Go the hell back where you came from, and go find somebody to kill with your scalpel, because we don't need you here.
Well, there is another point related to that, by the way, which is many analysts are tracking a rise in anti-Semitism in medicine. The anecdotes are pouring in about doctors who treat Jewish patients differently or aggressively once they understand their religious identity. This is, something that the writers of Tablet have been talking about for a while, but we've somehow imported the sectarian politics of the Middle East into this country. And as I was saying yesterday on the podcast, we just need to stop it. And the first way to stop it is by making sure our immigration laws are enforced, and by also pursuing what the Trump administration is doing, saying that you don't have a right to a visa here. If you have views that are hostile to Jews, that are hostile to America, that are against the West, there's no reason to grant you a visa. Like you say, go study somewhere else.
I think, I'm glad you mentioned the issue in the medical community. I have several friends who are doctors who have been screaming about this to me for years in their chat groups at their hospitals, at the diversity initiatives at the hospitals for which they work. And hospitals are now no longer, for the most part, individual buildings with individual managements. They're part of networks, larger networks. So, of course, they have much larger HR departments and things like that, all of which, of course, have been subject to the same ideological capture as other institutions. And the demand that is made by these HR departments and the like to express solidarity with the suffering people of Gaza, with the hospitals in Gaza that are being unfairly bombed for the distinct reason that they are command centers for the war against Israel, controlled by Hamas, all of that, that this is a very big thing. It's a very big issue. And it does get to the Hippocratic Oath, because we do have doctors saying on their Facebook pages and elsewhere that they will not treat Jews, or that, when they are treating a Jew, they have a little fantasy about doing the Jew in, those, because of the eagle eye of people who have decided to take this on as a cause, to look through social media platforms of people who appear to be involved in activism. A lot of these people have been spotted, and their misbehavior has been reported to the institutions, and they have been relieved of their jobs, whether or not their medical licenses will be removed for actually advocating the notion that they can use their life and death skills to create death instead of preserving life. I'm not quite sure of, but this is a very, very serious issue. And as you say, is a form of the export of terrorist ideology into the United States.
By the way,
So,
it's
yeah,
as such, it's worse in England too. The doctor issue.
yeah,
There's so many doctors that making videos about how they won't treat Zionists
right.
and all.
So,
Well, there was one case of a boy who has to get, it's a 9-year-old boy, I think, who has to get blood transfusions or something every so often. He has a condition where he's treated at the same hospital, the same treatment every so often, every couple months maybe. And he went in wearing his yarmulke and with the fringes of his tzitzit out, his strings out, and was taken off a bed and made to lay on the floor and, not treated well, whatever, by nurses with Palestine flag pins. And then a couple months later, they went back and they went back shorn of all Jewish look and presentation. And he was treated well and all this stuff. So the family was saying, we've had this experience about, that they make my sick 9-year-old boy lie on the floor if he comes in wearing a yarmulke in London.
I just want to connect that back to the op-ed you mentioned in the New York Times with the initial awful headline, which is, it's one thing for Jewish organizations to say anti-Semitism is rising in the United States. American Jews feel insecure. There's an anxiety about what's happening in the world. Okay, what are you going to do about it? Maybe write the op-ed about anti-Semitic doctors treating Jewish children like animals because they are quote unquote Zionists, right? We need more attention on specifics. I have to say, I'm getting a little bit annoyed at all these articles I'm reading saying, I feel so insecure. Yeah, duh. What do you have to do about it? How about Jewish self-defense?
right.
How about encouraging gun ownership among Jews? How about making sure we have armed security everywhere, right? And how about we actually support policies that are trying to address the problem rather than the New York Times running a front page article today on how Trump is an anti-Semite?
Yeah, written
By Peter Baker,
yes.
husband of Susan Glasser, who, and this is an achievement, is possibly the most Trump deranged person on the face of the earth.
Right. No, I think you are making a very important specific recommendation, because sort of the generalized, you should support guns and stuff like that. What do Jews do for a living in overwhelming numbers? They work in professions. right? They're not, they work in professions in larger institutions. So what they can do is police them. In other words, if you're a doctor, like my friends, the doctors, you look and see what's going on there and you do something about what's going on inside your hospital. If you're a lawyer, you do something about what's going on in your law firm or in the courthouse or in the bar association or something like that. And on and on. Your insurance company, your whatever, the Fortune 500 company you're working for, the investment bank you're working for, that is your obligation. Your obligation is to police your own institutions and try to make it clear that what is going on, as we have been taught we're supposed to say, is making you feel unsafe. Only actually, it is making you unsafe. It's not just making you
Right. It's not
feel
feelings.
it's not publishing Tom Cotton's op-ed so that Mara Gay, who hasn't felt unsafe a day in her life, feels unsafe from rhetoric that she doesn't like. It is that actually the behavior of people who argue before the bar, who have licenses from the state that allow them to administer medications and perform operations that could kill you, all of that, if they express views that suggest that they are willing to entertain the idea of violence against other people, this is something that needs to be surfaced and known. And let's go back to the universities for a second, because we've had this issue over the last week. MIT's commencement featured the president of the class of 2025 handing MIT a speech that she said she was going to deliver, and then instead she delivered a broadside against Israel and genocide and all of this. And I saw various people who were graduating that day, not only undergraduates, but PhD candidates, saying, I had my family there, and this was very disheartening to us. My kids said to me, as one PhD candidate, or, one successful PhD said, why do they hate us? This is so awful. Well, let me ask you a different question about the person who was the president of the class of 2025 who made that speech. Why is she the president of the class of 2025? Why was the Harvard Law School student who was, responsible for the contretemps with the Jewish business school student that is now, the subject of massive litigation and complex litigation? Why was he the president of the Law Review? Because of their views. It's not it's not because they were just great students who put their nose to the grindstone and really wonderful editors who commissioned brilliant articles on the Seventh Amendment. They were chosen, and they are there because they are expressing anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitic views, and they are being elevated because of it. That is the institutional rot in the United States. And again, if you do the thing where you pluck out little bits of things and say, oh, I feel so bad, I feel so sorry, this was really hard on me, and if I were Anne Frank, would you hide me in your attic? You can't just hide in an attic. This is the United States. You don't have to hide in an attic. Go at them. Go for their jugular. Be Shabbos Kestenbaum. Be, Stand With Us. Be Canary Mission. Be the people on Twitter, Stop Anti-Semitism, who literally find out who these people are and report them to their places of work. That is the only way. The idea that there have to be consequences and costs for these views that will include not only possible loss of job and possible loss of standing and public exposure, but moving on to Mr. Suleiman, deportation, arrest and deportation, or arrest and jail for life because of what you did in the United States. And let's see how much you enjoy being in prison as somebody who throws firebombs at American citizens.
Yeah, well, and that's the two sides of this thing. I once called it in a post I think it was Dr. Snowflake and Mr. Intifada. It's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of the pro-Palestine movement, which is, on the one hand, it's like, oh, you feel unsafe from words, you poor Jews. Oh, you poor Jews, you're burning children alive in Gaza, and you're worried about people being mean to you at a protest or whatever. And then in the next breath, it's, I don't feel safe with a former IDF soldier in my class. I don't feel safe with an Israeli in my class, and this and that. And it's the two sides of it. It's they're playing the snowflake game, and then making the snowflake accusation, when in fact people should just say, like, then clean up your act. It's like, when I watch these things happen, the firebombing, the Molotov cocktail attack at the Colorado walk, which again was for hostages, right? Again, like the people who tear down hostage posters. Not that it would justify it in any way, shape, or form, but this is the most anodyne thing you could possibly think of. But when they do this, then I kind of think, like, there's so many people right now worried about backlash against Harvard, right? It used to be, I'm worried about a backlash against Muslims. There's going to be Islamophobia, and there's still that stuff. But now it's like, oh, but what will happen to Harvard? Because now Trump's going to be even meaner to Harvard. And it's like, get your act together and fix your problems. I'm sorry, but you're just like, I can't bring myself to feel much sympathy for the institutions that have become intifada factories and putting this stuff out into the world. And then there are consequences. And it's like, well, but the real process should be, Trump should give 30 days notice for the funding of this and that. And it's like, well, maybe, but you know what? I'm tired of hearing it. I like the 30 days notice. Don't give me process arguments when we're seeing Molotov cocktails. Like, fix your intifada factory and stop playing the victim. Harvard University, which has more money than God and seems impregnable.
Well, look, that was one of the key points. Another astounding New York Times piece in the last week or 2 weeks about how, after 18 months of division and torturous conflict, ideological conflict on the campus of Harvard community has finally come together against Trump because they're very worried about Harvard. You know what they should be worried about? They should be worried about barbarism on our shores in the United States, which is infectious, and in which there are people, and have been people here for 25 years or 30 years, who do not have the best interests of the United States at heart. A couple of them, one Palestinian and one Somali, are leading figures of the Democratic left in the House of Representatives. One of them, the Somali, Ilhan Omar, brought here as a humanitarian mission because her country was racked by civil war, and is now an elected official from Minnesota trying to destroy the United States from within. So grateful is she for the salvation of her life and the liberties and freedoms that she was granted by being granted asylum and then citizenship in the United States, that she is attempting to lead people to deny rights and lives because they disagree with her on the nature of the state of Israel.
I think the DC shooting and the firebombing have changed some of those minds that weren't yet changed on the nature of the protesters, or at least started to. It makes Trump's case very gruesomely, perfectly, and there's no one that can now say, oh yeah, those hordes who have been chanting globalize the intifada for 20 months in every city and on every campus and wearing keffiyehs and yelling free Palestine, oh yeah, they have nothing to do with that guy who just killed two young people, whipped out a keffiyeh and said free Palestine, or the guy with the flamethrower who said he's doing it for Palestine. Like, the line between connecting the protesters and the actual domestic terrorism has been drawn it's bright, it's clear, everyone sees it, and I think it's the beginning, the very beginning. Believe me, um, I'm not expecting people to rush to our side here. It is the very beginning of a kind of a new liberal understanding of, I think these guys are bad. I think we went a little bit out on a limb here, as we did with BLM and defund the police and gender affirming care for kids. And it takes them; they have to see the real world horror happen before they go, "Oh, I could have sworn I was on the right side, but maybe I wasn't."
So let me tell you two quick things. So I'm in a group chat with a bunch of friends of mine from my kids' Jewish day school. And when it was revealed that Suleiman was, as his profession, an Uber driver, I said, in a kind of thing that I would never have said after 9/11, and I have never said before, I said, I'm not sure I'm going to take Ubers anymore. People, if you know, particularly in New York, if you order an Uber, and I do it rarely because I prefer the subway, but if you order an Uber, you will often have a driver named Mohammed. Okay. So am I racially profiling by saying that I really maybe right now wouldn't want an Uber driver named Mohammed? Yes. Is that crazy? Maybe it sounds a little crazy. How many Uber drivers are there? Tens of thousands of Uber drivers. And now I'm just saying every Uber driver could be a potential terrorist. As somebody in the group chat said to me, I mean, why are you focusing on this? And I was like, and then I remembered what it was that I had forgotten that triggered this idea, which was that in Amsterdam, when the pogrom happened after the soccer game with the Israelis, the message went out to go hunt down Israelis over the Uber system. Through the Uber app, the drivers had some communications network, and it was go to X neighborhood and start doing something. So I don't know if the app works like that in the United States. I have no idea how that would work, but I didn't make it up in my head. This is something that was done 6 months ago. It's just there's so much news and there are so many anti-Semitic events in the world that I had forgotten this thing that obviously was the trigger in my memory. And the second thing to say about this is, as you say, Abe, like, people need to see the horror for them to know. Well, one of the reasons to oppose anti-Semitism, if you are not a Jew and you don't really care and you got your own problems, is that Jews are the canary in the coal mine. They come at us first, and when they are feeling their oats, they come at everybody else. So Palestinian terrorism came at Jews first, and then they started hijacking planes in Europe, right? And then 9/11 happened in the United States because of Jewish support for Israel, as Osama bin Laden in part said. We are the canary in the coal mine. If you're going to but you're going to throw Molotov cocktails on the street in Boulder in 2025, that is going to turn into the Weather Underground, and they're not going to stop by bombing Jewish sites. Because it's not just Jews they hate the West. If you're Ilhan Omar, you hate Jews, you hate America more, possibly. You've gone into the innards of the US government to destroy it from within. I don't think I'm saying anything that is too extreme.
Well, can I add just for your Uber point, just so people don't think that you're hysterical? Here's a headline from the Times of Israel in April. A French taxi app for visiting Israelis is gaining popularity amid rising anti-Semitism. So in Europe, they are talking about, like an Uber version of Hatzalah, because Israelis, especially, who are identifiable.
Hatzalah, as you should say, is a private ambulance service run by Orthodox Jews in New
anybody
York.
Can call Hatzalah. You don't have to be Jewish, but
anyone can call them. But it's a private ambulance and medical transport service. So if you need a cab in Paris now and you got a yarmulke, you're going to try to use this app because you will get a driver whom you are reasonably assured will not drive you into a bomb you, throw you out, and then have you set on fire.
And right, and especially in Europe, especially if you're Israeli, because you have to show your passport at various places where you go, and so if the hotel calls a cab for you or whatever, they're sort of nervous. And I'll read one more headline. This is from the Canadian Jewish News in March. So these are all the past couple of months. A new wave of companies are hoping to meet the growing demand for Jewish-friendly taxi drivers. There's something called Yidride here. There's like also there's several companies that like they're calling it colloquially, just as a joke, they're calling it like Jubers instead of Ubers. But this is, I mean, so, you know, Canada and France are places with a lot of Jews. And these are places that are Western countries and whatever. The fact that there's just even this,
with way many more Muslims.
If you're an Israeli traveling, you have to sort of be like, well, do you know a good taxi driver that won't dump me in the Vistula River in Europe or something? You know, like this is a thing that people are dealing with in practical ways now.
It's not like we're sealed off from this, you know. It's here to some extent, and it will be here to a larger extent. But I just have to say I have a slightly different approach. Everyone should do what they need to do for themselves. I'm in a different position. John, you have kids. Personally, I'm not curtailing one action in my life for these thugs. Nothing. I will not go anywhere. I will not take an Uber. I'll be vigilant. But I am not going to attenuate my life in any way, shape, or form and make it smaller to accommodate them.
John, maybe we should move to the Democratic Party. And
right.
We've already mentioned Ilhan Omar as, you know, one of the faces of the left in the Democratic Party. But there's been all this poll data coming out that you've highlighted that shows just how deep a hole the party is in, partly because of its affiliation with institutional anti-Semitism.
So, people will remember that it was maybe 25 years ago that Chris Matthews came up with this formulation that the Republicans were the daddy party and the Democrats were the mommy party. So, you know, on the playground, a kid gets injured. The mother runs over and says, "Are you hurt?" And like takes a Band-Aid and puts some Neosporin on it and like hugs the kid. And the daddy says, "You're fine. Go back out and play." Right. This was his formulation of the nascent differences between the parties as the gender gap widened and things like that. And it was always a pretty interesting descriptive approach. Now, in the wake of 3 decades of this, we have polling data after the 2024 election, a lot of it highlighted by our friend Harry Enton, CNN poll that shows that the Democratic advantage on issues that have typically been their bailiwick, or at least, you know, part of their bailiwick, are fading astoundingly. So, for example, which party is closer to your views on? So, in the world, in this poll, there are 7 issues: crime, policing, economy, immigration, U.S. role in world affairs, education, abortion, and climate change. And as now has been typical since 2023, November of 2023, interestingly enough, a month after October 7th. On crime and policing, Republicans have a 13-point advantage. On the economy, Republicans now have a 7-point advantage. They had a 10-point advantage in November 2023, but remember, Trump has been president now for almost 6 months. On immigration, they have a 6-point advantage. They had a 14-point advantage in 23. Nonetheless, they are still, you know, very highly. That's because I think Democrats have been triggered to pay attention. On the U.S. role in world affairs, parties are tied. Education, abortion, and climate change are the only ones that Democrats lead on. Here's the most important polling matter. Which is better described as the party with strong leaders? The public says that the Republican Party is the party with strong leaders by a margin of 40% for Republicans versus 16% for Democrats. Strong leaders. Gets things done. Republican Party, 36% versus 19% for Democrats. Party of extremism, that is the one thing that Democrats have an advantage on the Republicans on. Republicans 41%, Democrats 30%. Party of change, Republicans are 32%, Democrats 25%. And the party of the middle class, and this is the killer, basically even, 34-32. Party of the middle class was has been a Democratic stronghold number for, 20 years, something like that. That the Republicans were the party of the rich, and the Democrats were the party of the middle class. At the same time that all this is going on, we have this panic among Democrats that I assume is the result of massive amounts of voter file data collected by Catalyst and others, according to political analysts, that there is a complete cratering of support among Democrats from men, and not just men, but young men. And those numbers are double digit to multiples of double digits. And I look at everything that we're talking about here, and I look at that crime number and the immigration number and other things, and I say that an ordinary person looking at the order of battle in the United States says that the Democratic Party is on the side of people who want to use violence and racial threats and redefinitions of what it means to be human and all of that against me personally. It's okay to come at me saying I'm a sexual predator. It's okay to come at me saying I'm a homophobe. It's okay to come at me saying that because I like guns, I'm a sociopathic monster. And it's okay to come at me because I think that boys are boys and girls are girls, and that girls should be allowed to play sports without boys with long hair and in drag taking their trophies away from them. And I'm not saying this is a problem. Democrats are saying this is a problem. They are panicking to the extent that we got that hilarious story last week about meetings to try to spend $20 million to find a leftist Joe Rogan. There are plenty of leftist Joe Rogans. Joe Rogan was once a leftist Joe Rogan. Why do you think Joe Rogan isn't the leftist Joe Rogan anymore?
Just to interrupt, we should mention that one of the podcasters that the left is trying to promote as their version of the current Joe Rogan is Hassan Piker, a video game streamer who is a rabid anti-Semite. So the attempted solutions are only making the problem worse.
But top down, the whole thing about podcasting, talk radio, populist media is that they are grassroots. They develop their own followings in real time, over time, as a result of word of mouth. Every time Republicans have succeeded in punching through the media bubble to get to communicate with the American people, the Democrats say, well, we have a lot of money and we have a lot of famous people, and let's spend our money and do something about it. So Rush Limbaugh comes along, revolutionizes talk radio, and then suddenly it's like, we need our Rush Limbaugh. Let's pay Al Franken $6 million because he wrote a book called Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot to be on our radio network. But that's not organic. That's not how success happens in media. Joe Rogan becomes Joe Rogan with 190 million downloads a month because he came out of nowhere and with this complex of issues, bodybuilding, extreme fighting or whatever, whatever mixed martial arts fighting and smoking dope and saying, you know what? All of this talk about how, Me Too or this or that, like they're doing something. They're trying to do something to me and suppress me and you, and we better do something about
Can
it.
I go highbrow?
Please.
There's, of course, the literary critic and philosopher René Girard, who is very celebrated in certain conservative circles for his theory of mimesis, his idea that at root human beings are imitative creatures. We're always want to emulate people that we see doing or being what we want to be. Often that's being a success. And I'm simplifying Girard's theory. And of course, he also thinks that this kind of ratcheting of imitation often leads to catastrophe and scapegoating. But this is also a great way to see human behavior in media and in politics, right? Because everyone now, when they see the success of Substack, media companies want to say, well, how can we imitate that? How can we use that? Podcasting, right? Podcasting blows up. Everyone needs to have their own podcast. And in politics, once a party loses bigly, as our president would say, the opposite party immediately says, well, let's imitate what they did to win. In 2012, when Romney Ryan went down quickly to Obama Biden, what was the result? The GOP autopsy. What did the GOP autopsy counsel? It counseled that the Republican Party basically become more liberal, more like Obama's party. It said the Republican Party needed to moderate its stance on social issues. The Republican Party needed to embrace an immigration amnesty. The Republican Party needed to take affirmative steps, so to speak, to diversify its ranks. Now, as it happened, the man who emerged from the presidential primary in 2016 rejected all of those
Not really.
beliefs.
Not all of them.
No, I think it
What
did.
is
I
the
think,
more-
I
what
think
is
it
the
did
more
become more
diverse-
like the Democratic Party.
Did he embrace an immigration amnesty?
No,
Did he go out of his way to be inclusive?
No. But there is
Did he become pro-choice? Not in 2016. Every single thing he ran to the right. And he won. Okay.
Right.
And then see here we have 8 years later, Republican Party wins, and the Democrats are saying, "Oh, how did Trump win? Trump won because of Joe Rogan. Trump won because he has these huge majorities among men, and most dangerously for the Democrats' long-term success among young men. Hence, we need to do everything we can to imitate Trump's success." And what I'm saying is the next successful Democratic candidate for president will win on his own basis. He may actually end up rejecting woke, right? He may end up reaffirming the Democratic Party's tradition of being the party of the working class, but he's going to do it on his own. It's not going to be, John, as you say, this top-down, fighting the last war. Let's try to imitate what worked last time, because what works last time has no bearing, really, on what will work next time.
Harold Rosenberg, not to get highbrow again, of course, came up with this hilarious phrase, the herd of independent minds. So the Democratic Party prides itself on its diversity, supposedly its intellectual and ideological diversity, but they all think that exactly the same thing. That's actually not true on the right, to some of our regrets that we have about how reckless and crazy and irresponsible a lot of ideas are that are not on the left side of the ledger that we are having to contend with. But the drawing of ideological barriers and corners and the creation of a set list of ideological principles that you have to believe, otherwise you will be excommunicated from polite society, does not really exist on the right. And as a result, there is a lot more febrile activity, some of it very bad, but nonetheless creative, that does not exist on the left. You don't have to incept creative ideas about how to succeed in politics by having mass meetings and saying we need to, cook up Joe Rogan in a lab. What you need to do is look and say, what were the conditions that led to Joe Rogan? And one of the conditions that led to Joe Rogan was the calcification of free thought on the left. Rogan is a sort of was a libertarian person with leanings that are certainly very liberal, because he wouldn't like social conservatism and the idea that you need to restrain your behavior and, control and contain yourself because people need that order, structure, all of that. It's like, you don't have the right to tell me what to do. That is Joe Rogan. You don't have the right to tell me what to do. And suddenly it's liberals who are telling you what to do. You can't talk like this to a woman. You can't say this. You can't do that. 12 years ago, you asked someone out on a date and she was uncomfortable. We're going to expose that and get you fired, and you're not going to work for another 5 years. That's the world that Joe Rogan was responding to. And the Democrats show absolutely no understanding that it is that calcified creation of these impermissible and permissible boundaries that have pushed people to the right, pushed people towards, let's not even say to the right, but have pushed people, are actively repelling people. And when they stand there and they see people saying that Joe Biden is not mentally unfit, and that the entire media are supporting that with their, cover stories, and that boys are girls and girls are boys, and there's no such thing as gender and all that. They're like, I'm sorry, you're not describing, you are making me crazy. You're not describing the world as it is.
Right. I mean, what's required is a brain transplant, and it takes a long time. It took the Democrats 12 years from Reagan's election in 80 to 92 to get in a position where Bill Clinton could kind of eke out a primary win, right? It was not, he was the comeback kid for a reason in 92. People didn't really give him a chance. But Clinton was the candidate and the president who said, when he was running for elections both times, that we needed to be tough on crime, that we needed to reform welfare, that we needed to mend, not end, affirmative action, and that we needed to make abortion safe, legal, and rare.
And so the government had gotten too big.
And of course, yes. I mean, in the 1996 State of the Union, the era of big government is over, right? So that's a long process. And here's why I think it's more difficult this time. In 1992 and in the 80s, we didn't have the political sectarianism we have today. The parties were much more diverse in ideology. In both cases, there were plenty of liberal Republicans still left, and there were plenty of conservative Democrats and Southern Democrats, and that was Clinton's milieu. That's how he had survived as the governor of Arkansas throughout the 1980s. He understood what it meant to be a conservative Democrat. Look at today. We have two countries. We have Red America and we have Blue America, two teams. They are vastly different in worldview. And the Democratic Party has almost been obliterated in the South outside of the racial gerrymandered districts. Now, you could look at Georgia. That's an interesting example. Georgia has two Democratic senators, and maybe they understand, or they both got in through interesting circumstances, but maybe they might understand what it would mean to actually appeal to a majority. But instead, the Democratic Party has been kind of reduced to its academic media kind of affluent suburban strongholds. And that is not how they're going to come back from defeat.
Tonight, here in New York City, will be the one and only Democratic mayoral primary debate. It's an interesting race because New York City in the primary has ranked choice voting. I'm not going to go into the whole details of how ranked choice voting works, but it means that you actually list candidates in order of preference. And if a candidate does not get 50%, you retally, knock off the person at the bottom of the list, reallocate their voters based on how the people who voted to put them at the top of the list chose second, third, and fourth. And it goes on and on and on until you finally get somebody who goes over 50%. So there's a lot of weird politics that results from this. People are bidding for second place, or they want to convince people that not only should they vote for them, but that they should list this person second or this person third, because when they drop off, those votes will go to them. It's complicated. I bring this up not to focus on New York, but to say that the Democratic Party has gone so far in the direction of madness. In the city that from this liberal city with a 4 to 5 to 6 to 1 Democratic nominal registration advantage has, since 1977, with a couple of exceptions, voted to the right. Ed Koch, who then only was ousted from office in 1980 as a result of a series of political scandals by David Dinkins, who was a left-wing black Democrat who was ousted after one term during the crime wave by Rudy Giuliani, who had 2 terms because there was now term limits, and then Michael Bloomberg, who served 3 terms, having bought his way to end term limits so he could have a 3rd term. And then the roof caved in and left it.
And the Bloomberg's
terrible guy.
The Bloomberg's purchasing of that 3rd term, by the way, is not unconnected from the roof falling in, from the way that the moderates around him that normally get votes, Christine Quinn and others, were now associated with this kind of dirty game he was playing, and ended up with de Blasio getting.
You could argue that Adams was a reaction to
no,
de
that's
Blasio,
right.
right?
So here's the thing that I was going to, the reason I started in this potted history is to say that New York, largest city in America, had this interesting ideological makeup. It was very democratic, but it was a city of neighborhoods and a city of boroughs. And what kept it from becoming what Chicago became in the late 1980s after the Daley machine fell apart, though then a Daley came in and was mayor for a long time, all these other cities that we see was white ethnics, white outer borough ethnics who were like, what are you, crazy? Everything you're doing is making the subways unsafer. We're unsafe. We need somebody who likes cops, likes economic development, and is going to stand up to these race hustlers like Al Sharpton and others. And those white ethnics kept the city in balance. It was still a liberal city, but it was even though Giuliani, remember, was a socially liberal Republican, pro-gay rights, but it was all crime all the time. Bloomberg also very
when he ran for
liberal.
president, people pulled up like SNL sketches with Rudy and drag.
Yeah,
he wasn't just like policy wise. Rudy
was walking. Yeah, he was walking the walk. He wasn't just talking the talk. Bloomberg, Anyway, the polling. So the race has now come down. It's a 2-man race. It appears. And there is a candidate, there is a left-wing candidate. His name is Zohran Mamdani. He is not a native-born American. He became a citizen in 2018. His mother is a movie director named Mira Nair. His father is a professor at Columbia, I believe.
Great.
Excuse me? Yeah, I know. And he is running on a communist platform. State-run grocery stores with set prices, freezing all rents, various other things. It's socialism to communism, and he's very naked and open about it. And he is polling at around 22%. The conservative right-wing candidate who is now tasked with the job of saving New York City because he isn't crazy is among the craziest people who has ever been in American politics. and that is Andrew Cuomo, a crazy person, a person with psychopathic rage against his enemies who, like, self-centered, horrible COVID governor, totalitarian, setting numbers of people who could be in stores, closing churches, saying even before COVID, like, if you're a Republican, you have no place in my state, get out of my state, stuff like that. Very unstable person, ousted from the governorship by what I consider pretty lame sexual misconduct charges or sexual harassment charges. But nonetheless, so egregious a person was he as governor for so long, despite a pretty successful record as an infrastructure developer and producer, that he had to be kind of ousted. So here's where the Democratic Party is.
The hero Gotham deserves, but not the one it needs, or the opposite.
Or
the one it needs, but not the one it deserves.
Certainly,
you're leaving out another. You're leaving out another candidate, the incumbent.
Well, the incumbent is running is not in the Democratic primary.
Right.
He's running.
I mean, if Mamdani, who you just reminded me, actually is the son of Mahmoud Mamdani, who is a far left anthropologist at Columbia, who actually I helped move him into his apartment back in my work study days. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did he have many copies?
Little did he know. Little did he know.
A whole shelf.
He's a very sophisticated anthropologist, very, very academic. Not surprised. I did not realize that he was married to Mira Nair, and so that's why it took me a while to get that. But in any case, that just shows how Mamdani, the son, is a limousine liberal socialist, anti-colonialist, to bring up a term back from the Obama days. It reaffirms my opposition to him. But if he wins because of the idiocy of ranked choice voting, I think we have no choice but to support Eric Adams, flawed as he is.
I mean, I don't think he's going to win. I think he's out. But the reason I even bring him up, to get back to where we were, is that what's astounding about Mamdani is that he is winning among whites. Yeah. His entire electoral base is white.
In Manhattan.
And in Brooklyn and in the neighborhoods of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
He has 58% among whites in New York City who make up, in the category of white, about 33 or 34% of the voters in New York City compared to blacks and Hispanics. Hispanics actually make up the largest single contingent of voters in New York City, I believe. I would need to look that up. He's probably over polling, and is showing strength he doesn't really possess. And of course, there are many reasons to vote against Cuomo, which is why he only has 36%. He was a disgraced governor. People who hate Cuomo the most, for example, Orthodox Jews, whose yeshivas his education department went after, and whose religious gatherings he criminalized during COVID and acted as though they were, pathological spreaders of disease, because Jews are communitarian and cannot pray unless they are 10 men strong at the very least, and whose entire lives are based and constructed around living as a community, he criminalized. They're going to vote for him because they have no choice in order to prevent and Mamdani, by the way, is somebody who says that Israel does not have a right to exist in its as a Jewish state.
Right. I mean, we should make clear why, especially Orthodox Jews, are so, why they would need someone to defeat Mamdani, and that's because he says that he's going to arrest Bibi Netanyahu if he comes to New York. I mean, he's not just, he doesn't even try to blend in to the more, center left critique of Israel. He says we're going to arrest the Israeli prime minister, but he also, last week he made a campaign stop at this mosque, an Islamic center, and he gave a retelling of the pager plot, Israel's pager plot, and he did not mention the word Hezbollah. He just said that the pager plot was Israel blowing up thousands of pagers and killing scores of innocent people in Lebanon.
It would be like having the child of Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib as mayor of New York City.
Right.
It would be a disaster for the world's greatest city if this guy were to become mayor of New York.
But I think it is indicative. Look at Zohran Mamdani, and you are seeing the European, even though he's not a European, you are seeing the European future of the United States in his very person. Hostile to the Jewish state, hostile to Judaism without quite saying he's hostile to Judaism, socialist in economic views, hatred of American foreign policy. And you ask me why the Democratic Party is in crisis. This is not where America is, but it is increasingly where the Democratic Party, located as it is in 10 hotspots in a gigantic continental country, where I keep talking about this map, go look at it. It's 90% red with dots of blue. The dots of blue are highly populated. And they are, there are cities, and they are, but it is, if the Democratic Party cannot awaken itself or pull itself out of this death spiral, either it's a death spiral of some kind, or we're in a lot of trouble because they're going to take power again. And this is the vanguard.
Well, you're making me feel guilty because now I've just put myself back into that time in '99 when I was being a mover, and I could have dropped, copies of The Road to Serfdom or A Conflict of Visions in little Mamdani's bedroom, just kind of tossed them in there, surreptitiously, and maybe this terrible outcome we're foreseeing would have been avoided.
By the way, he's all in favor of freezing rents. Would you like to know why? Because Columbia professors live in rent-free apartments.
Very nice ones. Very nice.
The one Fairmount Avenue, Riverside Drive. I mean, I have a friend who is a Columbia professor, was a dean of one of Columbia schools. I mean, you should have seen this place. You should see this place. Views of the river right there on the corner in the building that's in the movie Enchanted. Astounding.
What was Huey Long's slogan was "Every man a king," and the new slogan of the Democratic Party is "Every man
Columbia professor."
It's not a man.
Yeah.
Every two-spirit a Columbia University professor.
Exactly.
Columbia owns about as much of Manhattan as the city of New York does.
But look, if I said to you in 2022, when Cuomo found himself bounced after becoming this elevated figure, right? The king of, the daily briefings, and he's wonderful. And my God, what a hero he is. If I had said that he is a marker of the potential salvation of the Democratic Party from its own madness, I would have thought you were a crazy person. But this is how bad things have gotten. And also how one of the reasons that they're so ineffectual in opposing Trump. Because they're not using the language of common sense and the common man to go at Trump. They're using the language of the academy to go at Trump and say, you know what Trump's real problem is? He's being too mean to Harvard. You know who cares about Harvard? People who went to Harvard. None of us went to Harvard. Harvard can itself. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Is Harvard the canary in the coal mine for Americans, the denial of academic integrity and academic freedom? I don't like the look of academic integrity and academic freedom after the last 2 decades and after the treatment of my people in the last 2 years. That's not a positive argument for me.
Well,
I believe in
what
8th
academic
century.
freedom exists when it's a monoculture and there are no conservative professors?
But I mean, it's not just that. Look, 8 centuries of the tradition of, of academic freedom and tenure and town gown separation, and the idea that intellectual inquiry needs to be protected from governmental depredations. As I say, that's, Oxford and Cambridge. That's where they emerged from, and the modern academic system emerged from in its 8 centuries. And where it has devolved to is no conservative thought on campus, no conservative opinion on campus, schools elevating to their leadership positions among students, people who want
No Americans on campus.
no Americans on campus. So yes, I believe that probably the Trump administration is being way too heavy-handed in how it's handling Harvard, but Harvard can go sink into the Charles. And, only the crew will be able to save themselves because they know how to row in the head of the Charles. So everybody get on the crew team so you can learn how to row in one of those boats so you can save yourself as it sinks, as it deserves, into the Charles. I'm going to make a quick recommendation, and it's an expensive one. If you can do it, people know I'm very, very much a fan or a consumer.
Is it rowing lessons?
My daughter did rowing for several years, and it is actually a wonderful sport. So rowing lessons are, I think, crew is a very noble thing. As I say, that's why I want all the crew people to get out, to make their way down the river to Worcester or wherever the hell they can get to from Cambridge to save themselves. I'm sorry, but I'm a connoisseur of the theater. I was just thinking as I saw a show last night that my first real experience of art as something that took my breath away. I was 7 years old taken to see the show 1776, which might also account for my extreme patriotism. But I saw a show last night called Just in Time, the Bobby Darin musical. And it is essentially a kind of concert. It's a sort of a bio show, jukebox show about Bobby Darin, the rock and roll singer turned standard singer turned actor, who died at the age of 37 in 1974. And it is staged as a concert and a biopic, live.
It's a trend.
There's many of it.
30
30 years.
MJ, Alicia Keys,
and Jersey Boys and stuff like that. Anyway, but Just in Time is essentially a showcase for a Broadway performer named Jonathan Groff. People would know Jonathan Groff if they'd watched Glee. He was on Glee some, and then he was also on a show called Mindhunter on Netflix, which was about the FBI's effort to track serial killers in the 1970s and 1980s. But he has been, for the last 15 years, one of the 2 or 3 leading musical performers on Broadway.
You're leaving out his most famous role on
Which
Broadway.
one?
King George III.
Oh, and of course, I was going to get to that. So
that's how my children know him.
So Jonathan Groff was in Hamilton in the flashiest part in Broadway history, literally on stage for about 8 minutes.
2 scenes.
Sings You'll Be Back. Astounding little performance, and is on Disney Plus. You can watch him there. But he has been in a series of shows, a revival of Little Shop of Horrors. He won a Tony last year for this brilliant revival of a flop Sondheim show called Merrily We Roll Along. Anyway, he is Bobby Darin in this show, and it is one of the most dazzling live performances I have ever seen. It's absolutely jaw-droppingly astounding to see him take the stage, likable, lovable, sings, dances his heart out, sings rock, sings standards, is touching, is arrogant. It's almost beyond belief what he pulls off on this stage. The show is called Just in Time. It's a small theater, and from what I gather, you're going to pay through the nose. We got tickets months ago, but you'll pay through the nose to go see it. But if you want a transcendent experience, stand there right in front of you in a Broadway theater, that would be Just in Time with Jonathan Groff as Bobby Darin. We'll be back tomorrow. So for Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.